Hello, my name is Dr. Yu-Chin, and I teach International Business and Entrepreneurship at THAI-NICHI International College. I'll be giving you a short introduction about economics, money, banking, supply, and demand. So what is economics? According to a famous British economist, economics is the study of the use of scarce resources which have alternative uses. Economics is a social science where students learn to study how individuals and societies make decisions to solve problems relating to limited resources and unlimited wants. The key problem that economists try to address is the issue of scarcity, which can be defined as the gap between limited resources and unlimited wants. Why study economics? Studying economics helps students to understand what is happening in the world around them, and they will also better understand people, businesses, markets, and governments, while being able to respond to the threats and opportunities that emerge when things change. Some people may think that economics is some kind of boring science, but actually it is more like philosophy where the lessons are applicable to almost every part of daily life. Studying economics gives a better understanding of how the world works, as well as helps students to make better decisions in life, both in the short term and long term. Economics does not use complex math, but since it involves money, some basic math is needed to make simple calculations about price changes and compare benefits versus costs. Economic events also often show up on daily news, such as changes in food and oil prices, but the causes of these economic events are not always clear, so studying economics will provide at least some basic understanding. Economics can be defined as the study of how society makes decisions to deal with scarcity, which is the gap between limited resources and unlimited wants. Resources are limited because there are always a finite amount of each resource. For example, there's a limited amount of money, time, and every raw material in this world. People are always constrained by the limited amount of money they have or the limited amount of time they have to do something before a deadline. Scarcity is an ever-present condition because Earth has limited resources and humans naturally have unlimited wants. Economists study how humans make decisions to allocate resources efficiently to satisfy basic needs and as many wants as possible. Humans by nature can never be fully satisfied because they always want something more even when they seem to have enough, which is the rationale behind the economic theory of why people have unlimited wants. One of the best examples to demonstrate the point is that if you finally earn 1 million baht, would you be fully satisfied? What about 10 million baht, 100 million baht, or even 1 billion baht? You will still always want even more money because human greed is insatiable and can never be satisfied. Unfortunately, Earth has limited resources. There's a finite amount of money, food, land, time, and other natural resources in this world, which creates an unending conflict with people's unlimited wants. An economy is a system for the production and distribution of the scarce goods and services people use in everyday life. Each scarce resource also has alternative uses, which economists have to consider. However, imagine there's a heaven, which Westerners call the Garden of Eden, where everything was available in unlimited abundance. In this case, heaven is not an economy because without scarcity, there's no need to economize. Every country in the world, no matter how rich or poor, deals with scarcity on a daily basis. The average middle-class American has a higher standard of living than the rest of the world, but even they have unmet needs because they always want more than they already have. There have never been enough resources to satisfy everyone completely, so even relatively wealthy Americans are constrained by the reality of scarcity. Economics students not only study the consumption of goods and services, but also production as well. Economics studies the consequences of decisions that are made about the use of scarce resources to produce the volume of output, which determines a country's standard of living. Even some countries with rich natural resources remain poor because of poor economic decisions. Economics is not just about money, but also about the efficient production of the volume of goods and services. Money does not even have to be involved to make a decision to be economic. Imagine a huge accident with over 100 cars and many injuries. Some of the injured are near death with little chance of survival, while others have a high chance of survival if treated immediately, and the rest have minor injuries that don't require immediate attention. In this situation that does not involve money, the medical team must be economical to avoid unnecessary deaths. The medical team must allocate their time and medications efficiently to save as many people as possible. Everyone from a single individual to the largest society on earth is always dealing with scarcity on a daily basis. Microeconomics focuses on the decision making of individuals and businesses, which includes goods and services, demand and supply, and markets. Macroeconomics studies how countries deal with scarcity, which includes measuring national economies, unemployment, money supply, government policies, and GDP growth. Resources in economics are referred to as the factors of production. Land includes all renewable and non-renewable natural resources. Labor refers to people with their skills and abilities, divided into unskilled, skilled, and professional labor. Capital refers to all tools, factories, and equipment used in the production process as a product of investment. Entrepreneurship refers to the ability to find and act upon opportunities to turn inventions or technologies into products and services. Whenever a factor of production is used, a cost is going to be incurred because resources are limited. Any choice to use land, labor, capital, or entrepreneurship for one purpose results in the loss of the ability to use it for another. These choices are called trade-offs. A common example of trade-off that students have to face are whether to study at an average school closer to their home to save travel time or study at a better school much further from their home. Both trade-offs have their own pros and cons. Opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative use of a resource. Opportunity cost is sometimes referred to as implicit cost. Every productive activity has explicit costs, like labor and raw materials, which are easy to calculate compared to implicit costs, which are difficult to measure. For example, what should you do during this weekend? Go on another trip to another province or work part-time? Cost of trip includes all trip expenses plus the money that could have been earned from the part-time job if the trip was not taken. Economists have a popular saying called, "There's no such thing as a free lunch." It is impossible to get something for nothing because in economics, everything has a cost. The money and time spent to eat a free lunch comes at the cost of your second best choice. To summarize, since resources are limited, carefully considered choices must be made about how these resources are allocated, which goods and services are produced, and how to distribute well-being. For every choice that is made, there's a trade-off, which basically means that for every decision that a person makes about one thing, that person also has to give up or sacrifice something else. For example, if a person is working a part-time job on Sunday, the trade-off is a decision to give up free time for relaxation or time with family. Trade-offs are assessed based on their opportunity cost, which is the value of whatever is lost when one thing is chosen over another. Opportunity cost is essentially the value of the second best valued alternative use of that resource. For example, many young adults are willing to pay very high tuition fees to study for an undergraduate degree for 4 years. The opportunity cost of studying 4 years in college is the money that they could have made if they worked for 4 years with a high school diploma instead. If the salary of a young adult with high school diploma is 15,000 baht per month, this means that in 4 years, they could earn 720,000 baht, get 4 years of valuable work experience, and minus the tuition fee they would have spent studying in college for 4 years. By understanding the opportunity cost of studying 4 years in college, new appreciation is gained for how much value that young adult students and their parents place on college degrees relative to their opportunity cost. Assumptions in economics are unrealistic conditions or beliefs that are often simplified in order to build economic models to explain how the world works. These assumptions are necessary to simplify complex situations in the real world in order to make them more manageable for analysis. Even though assumptions can help to understand economic events, it's important to understand that they don't accurately reflect every part of reality. 3 common assumptions in economics are ceteris paribus, or nothing else changes, rationality, and selfishness. Ceteris paribus, or nothing else changes, is the assumption that if something happens, and while holding all other things constant, then something else happens. For example, if income taxes fall and nothing else changes, then consumption increases. The second assumption is that people are rational and behave rationally. Choices are made with all available information considered, as well as the costs and benefits of the choice. The assumption simplifies decision-making processes to help predict human behavior, but obviously the real world is actually much more complex where decision-making is influenced by various other factors, such as emotions, behavioral biases, and imperfect information. The third assumption is that people are innately selfish, and therefore altruism is not possible in economics. People are assumed to be self-interested and only think of themselves, so whenever the time comes to make a decision, they will always make choices to maximize their own self-interest. Most people in the world are concerned with making money to the point of obsession or complaining about not having enough money. Money is perhaps the most powerful force that is driving the world economy, but what is money actually? What does money do, and why was money invented? Before money was invented, people traded through barter. Barter is the act of exchanging one good or service for another good or service. However, trade cannot occur unless both parties want what the other party has to offer. For example, a farmer trades a dozen chicken eggs with a baker for a fresh loaf of bread. However, if the baker does not want the eggs, then the farmer must use his network of village friends to find out if anybody has something that can satisfy what the baker wants. Suppose the baker wants a new broomstick, so the farmer must trade a dozen chicken eggs with a carpenter for a broomstick, and then trade this broomstick with the baker for a fresh loaf of bread. This outdated barter process is obviously a time-consuming process for exchanging goods or services, which led to the development of money. Compared to barter, money is a more efficient means of exchanging goods and services. Eventually, most societies develop money to replace barter. Money has evolved many times over the past few millennia. In the past, many things have served as money, such as salt, tobacco, shells, large stones, metals, leather, cigarettes, etc. Commodities such as gold and silver, which are scarce and valuable objects by themselves, were also used as money. Eventually, commodity money was replaced by representative money that was backed by gold, and later fiat money that was backed by the government. Money has three functions and five characteristics that makes it so valuable for efficient trade to power the world's economy. The first function of money is that it is a medium of exchange that is used for the purpose of buying and selling goods or services. The second function of money is that it is a store of value, since you can get it today or any other day and can still use it much later. The third function of money is that it is a standard of value where you can use it to measure how much a good or service is worth. The first characteristic of money is its portability, since it can be carried from place to place. The second characteristic of money is that it is durable, and its durability because it can withstand wear, pressure, or damage. The third characteristic of money is its divisibility because it can easily be divided when calculating the amount that was paid or owed. The fourth characteristic of money is its stability because the value stays consistent over a period of time. The fifth characteristic of money is its acceptability, since people agree that money represents what it is supposed to. Money used to be representative paper that could be converted into gold or silver, but governments later changed money to inconvertible fiat. Fiat money is government-issued currency that is intrinsically worthless and not backed by a real commodity. Money is money because the government says so, and we are willing to accept it. The conversion to fiat money started in 1971 due to the US government being unable to maintain gold at a fixed rate. Inconvertible fiat exists because wealth is the sum of all goods and services that an economy produces, rather than the amount of money stored, and the money supply is able to grow as the economy grows because it is not backed by anything real. However, people must have confidence that the money won't suddenly become worthless, or the government backing it won't topple tomorrow, while the central bank also has to carefully control its availability. Money is backed by nothing more than faith. Money is imaginary. Just think about all the deposits online bill payments, debit cards, and checks that exist, it is possible to survive in an economy for weeks without even touching money unless you absolutely have to use cash. The bank does not hold cash with your name on it. All the checking and savings accounts are nothing more than information stored on computers. However, inflation can damage people's faith in money. A country's central bank can monitor the money supply to make policies or regulations depending on the country's current economic situation. If the amount of cash circulating in an economy grows faster than the combined rate of labor force and productivity growth, then inflation will result. If more people were saving and not spending, then that would indicate that the economy is headed towards a recession. There is a time value of money. 1 baht today is worth more than 1 baht tomorrow. The reason has to do with opportunity cost and inflation. If you lend your friend the money in your wallet, your opportunity cost is the sacrifice of its immediate use. When your money is returned, the money will have lost purchasing power due to inflation. For example, a chair that costs 1,000 baht where you loan the money might cost 1,100 baht 2 years later, but when your friend pays you back, it costs you earlier use and more to buy it now. That's why when people lend money, they expect to be rewarded with additional payment known as interest to offset opportunity cost and inflation. An interest rate is the price of using money, and this price is determined by opportunity cost, expected inflation rate, and default risk premium. For example, if the real interest rate is 1% and inflation is 2%, then the nominal interest rate is 3%, and additional rates may be added depending on risk factors. Banks are everywhere in modern economies, and without them, capitalism would not function. In early societies of the Middle East, agricultural commodities were stored by the government, and records of deposits and withdrawals were maintained. Banks have three important functions. The first function of banks is that they are safe places for people to store their wealth. The second function of banks is that they help to facilitate trade by providing alternative methods of payment. The third function of banks is that they bring together savers and borrowers. Each of these functions is critical to the smooth operation of any economy because for people to enjoy their private property, they must feel secure in that property. By providing their customers with check writing privileges, debit cards, credit cards, and cashier's checks, banks help to facilitate trade. With multiple means of access to stored wealth, consumers are able to make purchases more often and in more places, which allows businesses to employ more land, labor, and capital, resulting in full employment. Banks encourage people to save their money by offering to pay interest. The saver benefits because he earns interest on the safe and relatively liquid investments. These savings are then lent to borrowers at an interest rate higher than that paid to savers, allowing the bank to profit. The borrowers benefit by having access to a large pool of funds. The economy grows because borrowers cannot purchase goods or invest in capital, leading to job creation. Money is not created on government printing presses. Money is created when banks accept deposits and make loans. To see how this works, basic accounting principles must be understood. A balance sheet compares the assets a bank owns with the liabilities it owes. Assets are equal to liabilities plus stockholders' equity. Assets are everything that a bank owns, such as buildings, equipment, loans to customers, treasury securities, vault cash, and reserves. Liabilities are everything that a bank owes, such as customers' deposits and loans from either other banks or governments. Stockholder equity is a bank's financial capital and the ownership interest in a bank that are represented by shares of stock. For example, a bank with 1 million baht in assets and 500,000 baht in liabilities would have 500,000 baht in stockholders' equity. Changes in the bank's liabilities create an equal change in the bank's assets. If a customer deposits 100,000 baht, which is a liability, then the bank's reserves increase by 100,000 baht, which is an asset. And if a customer withdraws 50,000 baht, the bank's reserves drop by 50,000 baht too. Capital requirements are cash money that a bank must keep on hand to conduct its operations as required by law. The ratio is related to the riskiness of its loans. Riskier loans create greater capital requirements. The purpose of capital requirements is to ensure that the bank is able to pay depositors if some of the bank's borrowers are unable to repay their loans, and to ensure that banks have a vested interest in making good loans. Bank reserves are funds that are either available for lending which are excess reserves, or held against checkable deposits, which are required reserves. In the US, the required reserve ratio set by the Fed is the percentage of checkable deposits that a bank cannot lend. For large banks, the required reserve ratio is 10%. Assuming the same 10% required reserve ratio for Thai banks, if a customer deposits 100,000 baht into a checking account, required reserves increase by 10,000 baht and excess reserves increase by 90,000 baht. So how do banks create money? 100,000 baht checking deposit generates an increase in excess reserves of 90,000 baht, with 10,000 baht as a required reserve. The bank lends 90,000 baht to a customer who uses it to buy a motorcycle. The seller of the motorcycle deposits 90,000 baht in the bank. The bank's checkable deposit balance grows from 100,000 baht to 190,000 baht in a short period of time. The bank can then lend another 81,000 baht while keeping 9,000 baht as a required reserve. Money is created when a bank continues to lend its excess reserves. Banks profit by charging interest on loans, so they have a strong incentive to maximize the amount of excess reserves they lend. Economists can estimate the growth in the money supply with the money multiplier. The number 1 is divided by the required reserve ratio. For example, if the reserve ratio is 10%, 1 divided by 0.1 is 10, which means if 50,000 baht is deposited, money supply grows by 450,000 baht. Banks work together as a system to bring together savers and borrowers. However, sometimes banks may not have excess reserves or people may not be willing to borrow. For example, if Red Bank is holding excess reserves with no borrowers and Yellow Bank has no excess reserves with many borrowers, Yellow Bank can borrow from Red Bank to provide loans for its customers, and Red Bank can earn interest from Yellow Bank. Everyone is happy. Since banks operate with far less than 100% required reserves, it is possible that if enough customers demand their account balances on a single day, an unlucky bank will not be able to meet the demand. A bank run is caused by fears about a bank's financial health. Poor management of banks in the United States has led to several economic crises in the past. Mass panic and deflation led to the Great Depression of 1921. Deregulation of banks and subprime mortgages led to the global financial crisis in 2008. Regulations of banks must be carefully managed by each country's government to avoid restricting economic growth as well as limit risk. Too much regulation may result in banks being small and not competitive, while too few regulation may result in banks becoming reckless and taking too many risky loans. In economics, supply and demand is the relationship between the quantity of a good or service that producers are willing to sell at various prices and the quantity that consumers wish to buy. It is the primary model that is used to determine price through the interaction of supply and demand in the market. The two sides meet to agree on the equilibrium price when the quantity of a good supplied is equal to the quantity demanded by the consumers. Markets are places that bring together buyers and sellers. Markets do not have to be physical places because markets can exist whenever and wherever buyer and seller interact, such as via mail or over the internet. Several conditions must be met in order for markets to function efficiently in a perfect competition. The first condition is that a large number of buyers and sellers are acting independently according to their own self-interest. And the reason a large number is required is so that no one has too much influence over the price. The second condition is that perfect information about what is being traded is available so that everyone has complete access to information about cost and product. The third condition is freedom of entry and exit to and from the market so that the maximum number of buyers and sellers can participate. The fourth condition is that sellers deal in identical products and are price takers, which means they are unable to influence the price much. Consumers ultimately get the most benefit when goods are sold at the lowest price. Economists would like markets to meet all the conditions ideally to function at maximum efficiency, but that is rarely the case in the real world. In the real world, there are often barriers to market efficiency which can harm buyers and sellers with inefficient prices. In a monopoly, there's only one buyer for a product which harms sellers, and in a monopoly, there's only one seller for a product which harms buyers. Sometimes prices may not reflect all available information. For example, a car dealer has all the information about the cost and specifications of each vehicle, while the buyer doesn't, which can result in the careless buyer getting tricked into buying a used car at a higher price. Government requires licensing for sellers in certain industries, which is a barrier to entry that limits the potential number of sellers, resulting in less competition and higher prices. In competitive markets, a variety of factors affect supply and demand, which in turn affect price and quantity. Changes in one market for one good can create changes in the market for another good with unexpected or unintended consequences. In economics, consumer behavior has a significant effect on the supply and demand of goods and services in any industry. People generally try to make themselves as happy as possible, which is known as utility maximization in economics. Consumers seek to maximize their utility that is subject to their budget constraint, amount of money to spend. For example, you have a bowl of your favorite candy. Each time you consume a piece of candy, you are experiencing marginal utility, and after consuming a certain amount of pieces, you are not quite as happy as when you started, and this is known as diminishing marginal utility. On one side of any market is demand, which is the quantity that consumers wish to buy at various prices. During an auction, you can see how much money people are willing to bid or offer to pay for an item. Demand is the willingness and ability to buy something. The fact that more people are willing to buy at lower prices than at higher prices is called law of demand. 3 reasons explain why this law of demand exists, which are diminishing marginal utility, income effect, and substitution effect. The first reason is diminishing marginal utility. As you consume more of an item, each successive unit provides less utility than the previous unit, so the only way you will buy more of an item is if the price is lower. You will consume this item until marginal benefit equals marginal cost. Supermarkets often take advantage of diminishing marginal utility by offering discounts to customers who buy 2 pieces or more of the same item, such as buy 3 oranges, get 1 free promotion. The second reason is income effect, which is based on budget constraint. As price of a good drops, purchasing power increases so you can buy more with limited income. The third reason is substitution effect, where you substitute less expensive items for items that become more expensive. This explains why an increase in the price of any product results in a decrease in the sales of that product because consumers switch to cheaper alternatives. Think about all the things that you buy in a year. Sometimes you are very sensitive to the price, but at other times you are not. You're more likely to shop around for a good price on clothes than for life-saving medicine. This sensitivity to price is known as the elasticity of demand. Demand is elastic if you can delay the purchase of a good, if it has many close substitutes, or if it is expensive for you. Demand is inelastic if the purchase must be made immediately, no close substitutes exist, or it is cheap for you. Demand and producer supply. Supply reflects producers' changing willingness and ability to make or sell at various prices that occur in market. The law of supply states that producers are able and willing to sell more as the price increases. As production increases, marginal costs also increase, so suppliers are only willing to produce if they can cover their costs. Elasticity of supply is the producer's sensitivity to changes in price on the quantity they are willing to produce. The key factor in supply elasticity is the amount of time it takes to produce the good or service. If producers can respond to price changes rapidly, supply is elastic. If producers need considerable time to respond to changes in the market price of their product, then supply is inelastic. For example, the supply of wine is more inelastic than rice because wine takes a very long time to produce. When supply meets demand, a price is born. In an efficient market, prices are a function of the supply and demand for the good or service. Instead of government officials dictating artificial prices or rationing who gets what, the market relies on the impersonal forces of supply and demand to determine prices and to serve the rationing function. The price of goods in the market and quantity bought and sold in the market is determined by consumers trying to maximize their utility against producers trying to maximize their profits. Supply and demand ration goods and services efficiently and fairly. Prices are efficient because they are understood by most participants in the market. Even a child walking into a candy shop with 100 baht can figure out what she can afford by herself. A price conveys much information because it communicates to consumers whether or not to purchase and to the producer whether or not to produce it. Prices are fair because they are neutral and don't favor anyone. A market is in equilibrium when at the current price there's neither a surplus nor a shortage of the good or service. Finding market equilibrium allows for consumers to maximize utility while also allowing producers to maximize profits. Sometimes the market is not in equilibrium. A surplus happens when quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, such as shirts in clearance sales. A shortage occurs when quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied, which auctions can resolve by bidding up the price. Changes in either demand or supply will cause change in both price and quantity. In economics, these changes in demand and or supply are known as shifts. As price changes, producers are willing to produce more or less, and while the price affects the quantity producers supply, it does not affect supply. The first factor that causes a shift in supply is nature, such as rain, sunshine, temperature, or disease, which affects the supply of agricultural products. Excellent weather conditions often lead to large increases in supply. The second factor that causes a shift in supply is input or resource prices, such as land, seed, equipment, labor, and storage, which affect producer supply decisions. Supply decreases as these costs rise. The third factor that causes a shift in supply is the presence of more or less competition, causes increase or decreases in supply. If a product becomes more popular, more producers will enter the market. The fourth factor that causes a shift in supply is the expectation of future price increases or decreases. The fifth factor that causes a shift in supply is the profitability of related goods and services. For example, land that is used to grow coffee can also be used to grow coca. So whichever product is more profitable will be grown. The sixth factor that causes a shift in supply is government policy, such as taxes, subsidies, or regulated production, which affect the cost of production and supply. The seventh factor that causes a shift in supply is new technology, such as artificial intelligence and robotic production, which allow producers to increase quantity of goods produced at each and every price. Shifts in demand can also happen. The first factor that causes a shift in demand is changing tastes and preferences. For example, good advertising can increase demand of a product, while bad publicity, such as scandals that involve dangerous toys or poison milk, reduces demand. The second factor that causes a shift in demand is changes in composition of the population. A young population has different preferences, such as more demand for toys and games compared to an aging population that has more demand for healthcare. The third factor that causes a shift in demand is changes in expectations about future prices. The fourth factor that causes a shift in demand is the price of related goods. Complements are goods that are used together with other goods to enhance consumption, such as hamburgers and french fries. Substitutes are goods or services that can be used in place of another good or service, such as physical books and ebooks. The fifth factor that causes a shift in demand is changes in consumers' income that leads to changes in demand. Demand for a normal good rises, such as clothes, when income rises, while demand for an inferior good, such as instant noodles, falls when income rises. As consumers' income rises, they consume less inferior goods and more normal goods.
THAI-NICHI International College Learning in a Beautiful Way